The White House justified a military invasion of a sovereign nation by claiming Venezuela stole American oil. But here's the problem. U.S. companies never owned oil or land in Venezuela. Not one barrel, not 1 acre. Officials never kicked them out. The entire premise was fabricated. And within 48 hours of that invasion, President Trump stood on Air Force One and threatened 3 more countries with military action: Colombia, Mexico, Cuba. 1 operation, 4 threats, 0 legal justification. Why aren't we talking about this? Here's how the mainstream media framed this story. Saturday morning, January 3, 2026. U.S. forces launched over 150 aircraft in a pre-dawn raid on Caracas. They captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife at gunpoint in their home at Fuerte Tiuna military complex. The couple was flown by helicopter to the USS Iwo Jima, then transported to New York to face drug trafficking charges. CNN called it one of the most stunning displays of American military might. Fox News celebrated it as a victory against narco-terrorism. MSNBC focused on the legal case against Maduro. What they emphasized: Maduro's corruption, his authoritarian regime, the suffering of the Venezuelan people, the drug charges, the heroism of American forces. What they ignored: the complete absence of congressional authorization, the deaths of 32 Cuban military personnel killed in combat, the international condemnation from Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Spain, Uruguay, and Chile, the questionable legal justification, the fact that Trump immediately declared the U.S. would run Venezuela indefinitely. The narrative technique here is selective omission combined with moral framing. By focusing exclusively on Maduro's crimes, the media avoided asking basic questions. Does the president have the authority to invade a sovereign nation without congressional approval? What gives the U.S. the right to install an interim government in another country? What are the long-term implications? Instead, they gave you a villain and a hero. Simple, clean, unquestionable. Let's look at what actually happened. Timeline first. December 2025. U.S. engages in secret talks with Maduro's government about oil reserves. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado promises to open Venezuela's reserves at a Miami business meeting Trump attends. Late December. U.S. escalates military strikes on Venezuelan vessels in the Caribbean. Coast Guard seizes oil tankers. Trump claims Venezuela's oil was stolen from the United States. Maduro rejects U.S. offer to go into exile in Turkey. January 2, 2026. Trump announces U.S. military will conduct strikes inside Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago signs agreement allowing U.S. military access to its airports. January 3, 2026. Pre-dawn. Operation launches. General Dan Kane later reveals forces spent months planning were positioned by early December. Over 150 aircraft strike Caracas. Targets include military airbase, government installations, legislative building. At least 80 people killed, including 32 Cuban military members. Maduro and wife captured, transported to New York. Now here's what Trump said at his press conference Saturday. Quote, "We are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition." He added, "We'll run it properly. We'll run it professionally. We'll have the greatest oil companies in the world go in and invest billions." And this: "We're not afraid of boots on the ground." Secretary of State Marco Rubio spent Sunday clarifying the administration wanted to see democratic transition. But Sunday evening on Air Force One, Trump doubled down. Quote, "We're in charge." He told reporters Venezuela's interim president Delcy Rodriguez must provide total access to oil and other resources, or she would face a situation probably worse than Maduro. Then Trump turned to other countries. On Colombia, he said President Gustavo Petro was a sick man who likes making cocaine. Quote, "He's not going to be doing it very long." When asked if that meant a military operation in Colombia, Trump responded, "Sounds good to me." On Mexico. Mexico has to get their act together. He claimed President Claudia Sheinbaum doesn't run her country. Drug cartels do. On Cuba. Cuba is ready to fall. Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela. On Greenland, he said, "We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security." Let's pause on the legal authority. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced Maduro was indicted in the Southern District of New York on narco-terrorism charges, superseding a 2020 indictment. Rubio defended the legality, telling ABC's This Week it wasn't an invasion, but a law enforcement operation that didn't need congressional approval. Quote, "This was an arrest operation. This was a law enforcement operation. He was arrested on the ground in Venezuela by FBI agents, read his rights, and removed from the country." International law experts disagree. Luis Moreno Ocampo, the founding chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, told CNN this constituted an aggression crime. Quote, "He bombed the country and then removed the president. That's political interference." Democratic Senator Mark Warner expressed concerns about precedent, asking, "Does this mean any large country can indict the ruler of a smaller, adjacent country and take that person out?" The joint statement from Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain called it a violation of international law and an extremely dangerous precedent for regional security. Russia condemned it as state terrorism. China called it serious encroachment on sovereignty. Even the UN Security Council scheduled a Monday meeting at Colombia's request. But here's what none of them addressed: the stated justification. The theft of American oil. The White House said the operation was justified in part by Venezuela having stolen U.S. oil. But according to multiple sources, U.S. companies never owned oil or land in Venezuela. They operated there under contracts with the Venezuelan government, which nationalized the industry under Hugo Chavez. No theft occurred. The premise was fiction. The reactions tell you everything about incentives. Trump's political opponents condemned the lack of congressional authorization, but struggled to defend Maduro. Senator Warner raised concerns about precedent, but stopped short of demanding action. No formal resolutions, no calls for impeachment hearings, just concern. Media figures celebrated American military power. They praised the operation's effectiveness. They didn't ask why 32 Cubans were killed in what was supposedly a law enforcement operation targeting one man. They didn't question why a drug arrest required 150 aircraft and bombing raids on government buildings. U.S. oil companies were quietly contacted by officials to gauge interest in returning to Venezuela. But sources told CNN the companies are wary of committing. They understand the optics. They understand the risk. Meanwhile, Trump positioned this as protecting American interests while rebuilding Venezuela's infrastructure. The language is identical to historical interventions in Panama, Grenada, and Iraq. Regime change framed as liberation. Military occupation framed as transition assistance. The contradiction is stunning. Trump claims Maduro stole American oil that never belonged to America, then uses that false claim to justify invasion, then threatens 3 more countries within 48 hours, then says the U.S. will run Venezuela indefinitely, while American companies invest billions in oil extraction. If you wanted to design a playbook for resource extraction disguised as humanitarian intervention, you couldn't do better. But here's the hypocrisy that deserves attention. The same administration that condemned Russian aggression in Ukraine just launched an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation, deposed its leader, and declared America would govern the country. The same officials who criticized Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea, just announced intentions to annex Greenland. The same voices that invoke international law selectively now dismiss it entirely. And the opposition? Silent on the core issue, concerned about process, not principle. Here's what happens next. Within 2 weeks, the Trump administration will announce a framework for Venezuela's transition government. It will include provisions for American corporate access to oil infrastructure. It will require Venezuela to accept U.S. military presence. It will restructure debt to favor American creditors. Delcy Rodriguez will comply because she has no alternative. Any resistance means she faces worse than Maduro. The opposition figures who fled Venezuela won't return to lead because they lack popular support, and Trump's team knows it. Colombia becomes the next pressure point. Petro is already deploying forces to the border, expecting refugee flows. Trump's threat wasn't casual. It was strategic signaling. If Petro doesn't cooperate on drug enforcement and doesn't stop criticizing U.S. intervention, he becomes a target. The administration has months of planning already complete. Mexico faces a choice: cooperate fully on border security and drug interdiction, accepting U.S. military operations on Mexican soil, or face increasing threats. Trump will frame it as fighting cartels. The reality will be expanding American military presence in the hemisphere. And here's why this prediction matters. The Monroe Doctrine is being revived, not as defensive policy, but as justification for offensive action. Any government in Latin America that doesn't align with U.S. interests can be labeled a threat. Any resistance can be called terrorism. Any resource can be claimed as stolen American property. The precedent set in Venezuela doesn't stay in Venezuela. It establishes a framework. The president can order military action without Congress, can occupy countries indefinitely, can install governments, can seize resources. And if you question the legality, you're defending dictators. That framework doesn't require congressional approval, doesn't require international support, just requires enough domestic media coverage that focuses on the villain and ignores the violation. Watch the next 30 days. Watch which countries receive ultimatums. Watch which American companies announce Venezuelan investments. Watch which congressional leaders stay silent. That will tell you everything about where this goes. This information is being systematically downplayed across mainstream platforms. Major networks gave this story one news cycle before moving on. Social media algorithms are suppressing critical analysis in favor of partisan celebration or partisan outrage. They don't want you asking basic questions. They don't want you connecting historical patterns. They don't want you recognizing that the justification was fabricated. Because if enough people understand the precedent being set, if enough people demand accountability for military action without authorization, if enough people reject resource extraction disguised as liberation, the framework collapses. They need your silence. They need your distraction. They need you to believe this was about bringing a dictator to justice, rather than what it actually was. A demonstration of power, a seizure of resources, a warning to an entire region. If you want to help us fight the algorithm and spread the truth, you know what to do.